In the 850s, while the Kingdom of Asturias was on the rise, the Emirate of Córdoba was beginning to unravel from within. Political intrigues, rebellions, and ambitious warlords threatened Umayyad rule, setting the stage for a civil war that would shake Córdoba to its core. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in episode 37, we explored the decade that foreshadowed great instability in al-andalus. The rise to the throne of Muhammad I of Córdoba. On September 22, 852, Emir Abdulrahman II died suddenly. Though in poor health, some suspected his concubine, Terub, poisoned him to advance her son's claim, a continuation of a plot we saw in episode 33, Abdulrahman II of Córdoba. According to Ibn al-Qutiyya, the eunuchs secretly discussed the succession before making the emir's death public. Terub's allies lobbied for her son, but one influential eunuch argued he lacked the qualities of a ruler and they would anger the people of Córdoba if they elected him. So instead, they chose Muhammad. That same night, they fetched him in disguise, slipped him into the Alcázar, the palace next to the mosque, and proclaimed him emir. Muhammad quickly summoned relatives, courtiers, and the army leadership to swear allegiance. To prevent conspiracies, he expelled his brothers from the palace, compensating them with stipends and estates, and released cousins imprisoned since earlier dynastic feuds. Muhammad, who was about 30 years old, would reign until 886. Chroniclers called him intelligent and pious, though also stingy with state funds. His stinginess reflected harsh realities. Poor harvests, lost provinces, and shrinking revenues made austerity necessary after the prosperity of Abdulrahman II. His reign also saw harsher measures against Christians, including higher taxes and exclusion from administrative posts, especially in response to the radical movement of voluntary martyrs of Córdoba, as we saw in episode 35, Religious Extremes and Islamic Law in al-Andalus. The Rebellion of Toledo and the Battle of Guadacelete. Rebellions on the frontiers of the Emirate of Córdoba were the norm throughout the 9th century. The reasons varied, but they usually shared opposition to the tax policies first imposed by Al-Hakam I, which turned Umayyad Córdoba into a vortex seeking to swallow up the resources of all al-Andalus. In the case of Toledo, there was always the demand to appoint their own governor. And more circumstantially, the Emir Muhammad's measures against all Christian Mozarabs may have fueled Toledo's new uprising. According to Eduardo Manzano Moreno, the fact that the Toledans withstood long sieges, launched their own military campaigns, and negotiated thoughtfully shows that their citizens were cohesive and united around the demands for lighter taxation and political autonomy. This is also evident in the fact that Caliph Abdulrahman III later had to accept Toledo's traditional demands in order to secure its loyalty. Toledo was the capital of the Middle March. As such, it became a center of Islamization while still maintaining an important Arabized Christian community. The former capital of the Visigothic kingdom was an obligatory passage for overland connections across the peninsula, for armies and for trade alike. Toledo's role as the strategic, political, and economic hub of its region gave it the strength to rise up against Córdoba with considerable success. And how did this revolt begin? As with other uprisings and escapes, Córdoba had a large building where the sons of aristocrats and former rebels from across the land were kept as hostages, a guarantee of submission. The Toledan rebellion of the 850s began when two hostages, originally sent after the failed revolt of 837, managed to escape from this golden prison. The Toledans captured the emir's brother and the governor of the city appointed from Córdoba. They released the Umayyad but used the governor to blackmail Muhammad into freeing the remaining Toledan hostages in exchange for his loyal men's release. The emir had to comply since as patron he was bound to ensure the well-being of his clients. Failure to do so could have caused a grave crisis among the wider Umayyad client network. Having won this concession, the rebels grew bolder and attacked Calatrava la Vieja, a key stronghold between Córdoba and Toledo that had been fortified only a few years earlier precisely to contain Toledo's recurring uprisings. Old local rivalries may have fueled the offensive. The result was the massacre or expulsion of Calatrava's inhabitants and the destruction of its walls. Such an attack could not go unanswered. Muhammad sent an army, but it was ambushed and defeated. The Toledan conflict escalated to unprecedented proportions. Toledo allied itself with Berbers from Almadén, in today's province of Ciudad Real, and launched raids farther south. The Umayyads, meanwhile, had the support of the Zenun, a Berber tribe later Arabized as the Banu Dilnun, who at this time controlled the Cora of Santander, roughly corresponding to modern Cuenca province, though extending further. Thanks to intelligence from spies, in March 854, the Toledans and the rebel allies surprised the Umayyad army camped at Andújar, in Jaén province, dangerously close to Córdoba itself, showing just how far Toledo could project its power. Naturally, Córdoba reacted by preparing a massive expedition against Toledo to crush the rebellion. Knowing what was coming, the Toledans sent a plea for help to King Ordoño I of Asturias. In late 850, King Ramiro had died and been succeeded by his son Ordoño, described as a benevolent yet strong and warlike monarch. Determined to expand his kingdom's influence, the King of Oviedo dispatched Count Gatón of El Bierzo, who at the time was consolidating Astorga within the Asturian sphere. The medievalist Carlos de Ayala explains this unprecedented Asturian support for the Toledan revolt as driven by the political integration of new territories in the Douro Basin, by the sharpening of a neo-Gothic reconquest ideology, and of course, by the symbolic importance of Toledo in the memory of the Visigothic kingdom. The Asturian monarchy was trying to spread the idea of being the protector of the continuity of the defeated Gothic people and of restoring the monopoly of the Catholic Church. In this way, they sought to promote a pan-Hispanic Catholic sentiment centered on the Asturian monarchy. The kings of Asturias thus emerged as the clear political alternative to the Umayyads, and Toledo's request for aid reflects recognition of Oviedo's growing power projection. Asturias was beginning to play an active role in the political affairs of al-andalus. The Cordovan expedition was led in person by Emir Muhammad. In June 854, the Battle of Guadacelete took place, when a small Cordovan vanguard clashed with the rebel coalition supported by Oviedo. The Emir's troops feigned retreat, drawing the enemy into a carefully prepared ambush. At Guadacelete, the Umayyad army completely encircled the rebels and inflicted a crushing defeat. Several priests accompanying the Asturians were executed on the spot, though Count Gatón of El Bierzo managed to escape. Arab chronicles speak of 8,000 dead in the battle, or 20,000 casualties on both sides during the wider Toledan conflict. The real figure was likely lower, but what is certain is that this was a major war for the time, with hundreds of deaths. Despite his victory, the Emir did not dare attack Toledo directly, and the city's defiance continued, though now without Asturian support. The Christians of the north paid dearly for backing the rebels. Several years of punitive raids struck Álava, Castile, and the Pamplona region, bringing the usual destruction of crops, seizure of castles, and enslavement of Christians. In his determination to subdue Toledo, Muhammad I stationed garrisons at Calatrava, Talavera, and Zorita de los Canes to block Toledo's access routes and isolate the city. His men also devastated crops near Toledo, just as they did in Christian territories. A Toledan expedition against Talavera in 857 ended disastrously for the rebels, with chroniclers claiming 700 dead. The Toledans, weakened by repeated military failures and isolation, sought and received the Emir's pardon. It was not long, however, before they rose again, this time seeking protection from Musa ibn Musa, who appointed his son Lup governor of the city. Yet, if the Asturian chronicles are to be believed, Lup abandoned Toledo after only a few months, defecting to the Asturian king along with his men after Ordoño defeated his father. Presumably, Toledo soon returned to obedience, though Ibn Hayyan tells us the city spent about a decade wavering between loyalty and rebellion. What we do know is that the city did not openly defy Córdoba again until 875, in the midst of an ever-widening cycle of revolts across the Emirate. I believe too many historians have overlooked its importance, but the Toledan rebellion of the 850s was not just another border uprising in Andalusian history. It was a major conflict with significant political implications, and as we will see next, it influenced Asturian advances onto the Meseta and the founding of Madrid. The Asturian Incorporation of León and Astorga. Ordoño I of Asturias expanded the kingdom's borders onto the northern plains of the Meseta. The Chronicle of Alfonso III claims he occupied the cities of León, Astorga, Tui, and Amaya, rebuilt their walls, restored bishoprics, and repopulated them with Asturians and Christian immigrants from al-andalus. These claims need nuance. León's Roman walls had already resisted a Cordovan attack in 846, showing the city had not been abandoned. León, Astorga, and Tui were inhabited before their political integration into the Kingdom of Asturias, which is why most modern historians prefer not to speak of repopulation. There was some immigration from both north and south. For example, two Cordovan clerics received a monastery and estates in Galicia, but most of the Douro Basin's inhabitants were long established. What changed was that these populations came under centralized rule after decades of being stateless following the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus. The Douro Basin had always been sparsely populated, lacking real cities by the mid-8th century, and was organized in local communities that were integrated into the Asturian polity sometimes through pacts, other times by force. A telling case is the Leonese region of El Bierzo, still structured around fortified settlements from Visigothic times. Castroventosa remained occupied and influential into the 9th century. Sources suggest Count Gatón of El Bierzo may have come from Castroventosa and helped bring Astorga under Asturian control in 854, showing how a regional magnate could rise to the elite of the monarchy of Oviedo. Such arrangements benefited both sides. Local elites strengthened their control over peasant communities, gained military protection and new opportunities for expansion, while the crown gained estates, troops, and influence. The monarchy often reinforced these elites with donations, privileges, new lands, and funding for churches, monasteries, and infrastructure. Among Ordoño's acquisitions, Tui seems to have been a very small settlement, but its inclusion meant Asturias controlled nearly all modern Galicia. According to the first Castilian annals, León was integrated in 856, about 2 years after Astorga. In both cases, bishops were appointed, underscoring their role within the Asturian framework and the dynasty's neo-Gothic ideology of restoring the Visigothic pairing of secular and ecclesiastical power. To put these cities in perspective, León's walled area was 20 hectares, Astorga's 27, and Oviedo's just 5. Applying a ratio of 45 inhabitants per hectare, León may have had around 900 inhabitants, Astorga 1,200, and Oviedo fewer than 500 before the 11th century. This shows just how small northern Iberian cities were at the time. León's later growth came from its status as a fortress and, above all, from becoming the royal capital, which drove its expansion from the mid-10th century onward. The Islamic foundation of Madrid. Madrid is the only European capital founded by Muslims, a fact that poses a problem for Spain's traditional national Catholic narrative. Many attempts have been made to trace Madrid's foundation to earlier times, linking it to a pre-Roman, Roman, or Visigothic settlement, but archaeology has not confirmed any of these theses. In the historic center of Madrid, no evidence has been found of a permanent settlement predating the Islamic period. Of course, in other parts of what is now Greater Madrid, earlier populations existed, including Roman rural villas, but these have nothing to do with the foundation of Madrid's historic core. Most Arab chroniclers attribute the foundation of Madrid to Emir Muhammad, though in Ibn Hayyan's Muqtabis, the founder is said to have been a rebel from a Muwallad lineage, with Madrid remaining a rebel stronghold until it submitted to Abdulrahman III. It's possible that Madrid had already existed at some point during the first 150 years of Muslim presence as an unfortified settlement, but its confirmed foundation came when it was fortified in the late 850s or early 860s. The Arabic toponym, Mayrid, from which Madrid derives, means place of abundant waters, and the site was chosen for its reliable water from the Manzanares River, its position as a gateway to the southern Meseta, and its fertile farmland and good pastures. Muhammad's decision to found and fortify Madrid, together with two other fortresses, was based on two complementary motives. First, to establish a loyal Umayyad fortress north of Toledo to keep its frequent disobedience in check. And second, to reinforce defenses along the frontier in response to Asturian advances into the Meseta, such as the incorporation of León and Astorga. The Central System Mountains were the Emirate's frontier. The first governor of Madrid was probably Ubaydallah ibn Salim from the Berber clan of the Banu Salim. The Banu Salim were well established along the frontier of the Middle March, like many Berber groups in the region. In fact, their name survives in the fortress town of Medinaceli in Soria, and they were also firmly rooted in Guadalajara province. Islamic Madrid was born as a small, distinctly military settlement, a fortress of about 4 hectares. Madrid also attracted ulemas seeking to perform the ribat, a practice combining military defense with religious study and ascetic discipline. Its historic core developed around the present-day Almudena Cathedral, where the citadel stood. Settlement spread outward with scattered dwellings that eventually became suburbs. In Arab-written sources, Madrid appears as a small urban center with walls, a garrison, a mosque, and a cadi. During the Umayyad period, Madrid remained a small frontier city. It grew further under the Taifa of Toledo, but it was under Christian rule that it reached its greatest development and eventually became the capital of all Spain. Musa ibn Musa, Lord of the Upper March. The Battle of Albelda. Musa ibn Musa of the Banu Qasi, a Mualad clan of native origin in La Rioja and Aragon, reached the height of its power in the 850s. Emir Muhammad I tried an approach opposite to that of his father. He showered Musa with offices in the hope of keeping him loyal. This was a grave mistake when dealing with ambitious figures like Musa ibn Musa, and for the Emirs of Córdoba it took decades to curb the dominant role of the Banu Qasi in the Upper March. In his very first month of rule, he named Musa governor of Zaragoza, in addition to Tudela and Arnedo, and 3 years later entrusted him with the entire Upper March, making him the emir's delegate across Aragon, La Rioja, and western Catalonia. The move strengthened Musa far more than Córdoba. The profits of frontier campaigns against the Kingdom of Asturias, Pamplona, and the Frankish counties mostly remained with the Banu Qasi. Córdoba often received little or nothing of the official fief. The clan expanded its influence, enriched by raids and patronage networks. In 856, Musa led a major expedition against Barcelona, burning fortresses, devastating its outskirts, and capturing the town of Terrassa. According to Ibn Idari, the fifth of the booty from Terrassa funded the enlargement of Zaragoza's mosque. But the sources for Musa's wars are confusing and contradictory, especially concerning the Battle of Albelda. We can only propose hypotheses and stick to the one that seems most convincing. In 850, Ordoño I succeeded Ramiro I in Asturias. When Ordoño began his rule, he faced the disobedience of the Vascons in Álava. Muslim forces, perhaps led by Musa, attempted to take advantage, but Asturian chronicles say Ordoño crushed both rebels and Muslims. Soon afterward came the Battle of Albelda, or battles, depending on interpretation, where the Arabic and Latin traditions diverge sharply. According to Ibn Hayyan, in the year 237 of the Hijra, that is between July 851 and June 852, a battle took place at Albelda, identified by many with Albelda de Iregua near Logroño, La Rioja. Some scholars dispute the toponym, but his account is clear. Musa fought the so-called Yalasquiyun, perhaps Gascons, perhaps Asturians. On the first day, the Muslims suffered heavy losses, and Musa was wounded. But the next day, they counterattacked and achieved a great victory. Arabic chroniclers rarely concealed defeats, so there is little reason to doubt this claim of success. Asturian sources tell a different story. They depict Musa as a Goth turned Muslim who rebelled against Córdoba, took Zaragoza, Tudela, Huesca, and Toledo, and triumphed over Gascons, Franks, and Muslim rivals alike, so much that he supposedly called himself the third king of Spain. This is most likely an invention to glorify the Asturian victory at Albelda. Ordoño, determined to stop him, besieged Albelda. Musa encamped nearby, but the Asturian king split his army. One part maintained the siege, while the other launched a surprise attack on Musa's camp. The Banu Qasi were routed, Musa was badly wounded, and barely escaped thanks to a Christian friend. Musa lost much siege equipment, weaponry, and the precious gifts he had received from the Frankish king Charles the Bold. The Asturians raised the fortress of Albelda, and Musa's son, Lup, abandoned Toledo and submitted to Ordoño. If both accounts describe the same events, the Arabic and Latin versions are very hard to reconcile. Some historians propose two battles of Albelda, one in 851 won by the Muslims and another in 859 won by the Christians. Others argue for only one, later reworked by Asturian propagandists in the legendary Battle of Clavijo, with the miraculous intervention of the Apostle St. James. I think the most plausible solution is that the sources are speaking of different conflicts. Around 851, Musa fought Gascons and Franks in the context of turmoil in West Francia. As you may recall from episode 32, The Birth of the Kingdom of Pamplona, Charles the Bald faced rebellion from Pepin II of Aquitaine and William of Septimania, both of whom had Viking and Muslim support. In this context, the Asturian chronicles' reference to Musa capturing Gascon and Frankish magnates makes sense. One prisoner was Sancho II, Duke of Gascony, ransomed by Charles the Bald, who later went to capture Pepin II for Charles. Ibn Hayyan's account of a battle against the Yalaskiyun could well describe this clash with Gascons and Franks, not Asturians. If my hypothesis is correct, then the Asturian account of Ordoño's victory at the Battle of Albelda reflects a separate campaign a little later, perhaps in 852 or 853. At this moment, Musa had just suffered heavy losses and had enriched himself with ransom payments, exactly the sort of vulnerable and ostentatious position that could have invited an Asturian attack. The common dating of 859 is much less convincing. Musa would not have been carrying Frankish gifts for so many years. The Asturian chroniclers were probably lying when they portrayed him already as master of Zaragoza and the entire Upper March, and with his son Lup governing Toledo. The hypothesis is not flawless. It is odd that Musa is reported as wounded in both battles so close in time, and it's difficult to explain how he could still be promoted to Zaragoza or the entire Upper March after a serious defeat. But it is more plausible than assuming one side simply invented events. Whatever the precise sequence, these wars show how prominent Musa ibn Musa had become. Yet Albelda itself remained outside Asturian control, only later falling to the kings of Pamplona after the disappearance of the Banu Qasi from the political stage. The Vikings return, the expedition of 858 to 860. About 15 years after the first Viking expedition of 844, another force arrived that lasted nearly 3 years and operated across the Mediterranean. The identity of these raiders remains debated. Nordic chronicles, often unreliable, attribute it to the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, figures popularized in the TV series Vikings. Frankish sources suggest they were Danish pirates. Whoever the leaders were, they came looking for new lands, after easy victories in the Carolingian Empire and the British Isles. In the summer of 858, they struck Galicia. The Chronicon Iriense, linked to Santiago de Compostela, interprets the raid as divine punishment against King Ordoño I for prosecuting Compostela's bishop, accused of sodomy. The chronicle omits that the Vikings were expelled quickly without serious damage. From there, about 62 long ships sailed along the western coast of al-Andalus. This time, the Emirate of Córdoba was far better prepared. Abdelrahman II had fortified the coasts and created a permanent fleet to patrol the seas. This fleet intercepted 2 Viking ships near Beja, modern-day Portugal. Emir Muhammad mobilized troops across al-Andalus to fight the pagans. The Vikings burned Algeciras mosque, but failed to plunder Seville again, which was defended in part by a brother of Musa ibn Musa. Sailing south, the Vikings ravaged the small Emirate of Nekor in Morocco, enslaving many, including women of the ruling family. Muhammad helped pay the ransom because they were clients or vassals of the Umayyads. The raiders then appeared in southeastern Iberia, capturing Orihuela, and moved on to the Balearics, where they took many captives. Despite the scale of the expedition, their Iberian campaign brought little reward, with greater success in North Africa. From the Balearics, they headed for southern France, sacking villages, monasteries, and cities like Arles and Nimes, then wintered at the mouth of the Rhone River. Early in 859, the force split. One group returned toward Aquitaine, while another pressed deeper into the Mediterranean. The returning group may have lost 4 ships to the Umayyad fleet before reaching Pamplona, where they captured King García Íñiguez. Much confusion remains about how they got into Navarre, but they likely circumnavigated the Iberian Peninsula. Unable to pay the full ransom at once, García's family handed over some of his children as hostages. Meanwhile, the other contingent raided up the Rhone, then Italy, sacking Lucca and Pisa. By 860 they turned home, only to find an Andalusi fleet bearing Gibraltar. Equipped with archers and Greek fire, the Umayyads destroyed 2/3 of the fleet and captured several ships. For the Vikings, the story became an epic saga full of adventures in exotic lands, but in reality the expedition ended in disaster. Strong defenses and swift mobilization in both Asturias and al-Andalus minimized the damage, and the Vikings did not return to Iberia for nearly a century.
The verdict.
Tradition magnified Musa ibn Musa's importance, echoing Asturian chronicles that styled him the third king of Spain and master of an independent upper march. In reality, he was a powerful but not autonomous warlord. From a critical perspective, in 2010, Jesus Lorenzo Jimenez analyzed the history of the Banu Qasi. Sources portray Musa as ambitious and opportunistic, winning victories and suffering defeats, but always within Córdoba's political framework, sometimes loyal, sometimes rebellious. The emir's dismissal of him in 860 proves he was no independent monarch. Asturian chroniclers had reason to exaggerate his power. The greater the enemy, the greater their king's victories. And with that, the verdict ends. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and leave a comment, and please subscribe to New History of Spain on podcast directories or YouTube. You can support my work and get early access to all my content, appear in the credits, or receive exclusive merch by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/newhistoryspain. Or if you don't like paid subscriptions, you can donate following the links in the description. In the next episode of the chronological series, I will explain the reign of Alfonso III of Asturias, but that will be next month because I'm taking 2 weeks off. See you then!